Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is Alex Astley, Managing Director at Hub International. Appreciate the patience as we kicked off today's LinkedIn Live. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a while. I'm here with Lisa Haynes. Lisa is a speaker, author, someone I've had the privilege of working alongside for many years, former executive and finance executive with a long story career, but had the ability to retire and decided to write a book called Retired and Killing It, The Ultimate Retirement Plan. And so I'm thrilled to sit down here, Lisa, welcome with you today and talk about the real side of retirement, not just how to get financially ready or the financial planning piece, but the human and mental side of retiring. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me. It's always good to see you.
Yeah, so before we jump in, a couple of things for everyone watching. If you have questions during our conversation, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Secondly, as I mentioned, Lisa is an author on a really cool book. We have a few free copies of Retired and Killing It that we're going to give away as part of today's LinkedIn Live. So look for a message at the end. And if you want to grab a copy of your own as well, we'll have a discount code that we can share with you. So Lisa, let's start on that subject. Let's start with the book. What made you write it? You had a long, successful career. You could have just enjoyed your retirement with sunny weather and warm beach environment. What was it that made you sit down and say, I need to put this on paper?
Alex, it really was because I felt like I was experiencing something that I could not possibly be alone in, and that was adjusting to this new phase of retirement. And so you and I had worked together. I was at MBA for 10 years, and for 10 years, you worked hard to help me prep for this moment. I remember the day we met, and you said, "What are your goals?" I said, "I want to retire at 55." And you looked down and said, "Well, we got a lot of work to do." And I came pretty close, but what happened was I got really prepared financially, and so I was ready to go. But I realized when I stepped into retirement, I didn't know what I was going to do 100%. I had some thoughts and ideas, but I didn't really know what I was going to do. And so I ran into several little brick walls along the way, and said, I can't be the only one that's wrestling with this, particularly stepping out of an executive job where you're constantly busy. You really go from 100 to zero, having been on 100 for so long, and just felt like this was a message that I needed to help other people get a plan for.
And I know, as you mentioned, we worked alongside one another for a number of years in your role, both leading the retirement plan at MBA, but also as an investor and saver in the 401k and saving for your own financial future. And I recall kind of along the way, you definitely had that goal. Like I don't want to work all the way until 65 or 67, sort of the traditional normal retirement age. I want to retire early and enjoy, my life in retirement. But you also, I think, had this kind of mindset that retiring didn't necessarily mean you're going to just stop doing everything. You still felt like you had a lot to give. Was there a specific moment or conversation either before you officially retired from your career or shortly after that you felt like this path of writing this book and really doing what I would call like financial behavioral life coaching was where you were going to give post your career? Was there something that like turned on that light bulb, or did it just kind of was it something you were planning for a while? I'm interested to learn more about that.
Yeah, so my retirement story is I was thinking about what to do next. I'd been in my role for a number of years, really felt like I had reached the place that I wanted to get, felt like there was more to give, but I wasn't necessarily sure that was the place to give it. And so I sat down with a transition coach and we
Mhm.
talked about, well, what do you want to do next? She gave me a series of questions to answer and said, let's go away and you come back. I came back and the questions were things like, what kind of company do you want to work for? What kind of team? How big of a team? What's the culture? There were lots of questions. And when I finished answering those questions, I thought, I don't want to really do any of that. I don't want to start all over again at this age. And that was my retirement decision. That's when I called you and said, can I do it? And so I walked into retirement. And honestly, because I didn't have a plan, Alex, I started doing everything because I didn't know how to keep still. I almost didn't give myself permission to retire. So I started right out the gate with taking executive coaching training, right? So I'm working toward an executive coaching certification. I always wanted to do executive coaching, because you coach as a leader. And I thought,
Hmm.
I think I could be really good at this. So that was my initial, I'll do executive coaching. I picked up one or two financial consulting clients quickly, obviously, as a retired CFO. And then I started to do like more things. Like, oh, what else can I do? And I sit on a advisory board for a startup organization, and one of the members of the board, one of the colleagues, he got us this certification in retirement coaching. I'm like, well, what is that? Because I'm always interested in something. So he sent me the information. And as I started to read through this certified professional retirement coach, I said, this is like they have something here. Nobody prepared me for all of the issues that we talk about in these. So I started taking the courses, not knowing that this is what I was going to do. But as I start taking these courses, the more interested I get, the more I talk to people, I realize it really is an issue for people. And so as I actually happened to be on the stage at Empower, the MBA's women's conference, and I said, kind of tongue in cheek, yeah, I'm retired now and I'm killing it. Well, I then somehow this formula comes to me, killing it. And I
Right,
realized,
which is an acronym,
which is
right?
an
Yeah.
acronym. Yeah. So, and I like acronyms because I can remember them. And so I thought people like acronyms and they can remember that. And if we had an acronym for what you need to do to plan your retirement, that could be really helpful to people. And so I decide I'm going to put this on paper, which then turns into, it started out I'll just kind of do it as workshops. But then it quickly turned into, I really think this should be a book. So I decided to write this book. And the more I talk about this, the more people tell me, yes, this is interesting. This is where I'm at. I start to find people who really want to have this conversation about retirement, not necessarily the financial side. They do have financial questions. And so there's always going to be a need for the financial side because it's really the number one
Hmm.
concern in retirement is, will I have enough money? But beyond the, will I have enough money, people have to start thinking about, what am I going to do for the next 20 to 30 years of my life? Even if you retire at 65 or 67, the average lifespan is extending. And for men, I think it's 87, and women, it's 92 or something.
Hmm.
What are you going to do all that time? That's a long time to just play checkers, play tennis, play golf, whatever your activity is, if you don't have a plan to do something else. And so that triggered me to say, this needs to be something I want to help other people not struggle through this and get their plan together and get excited about retirement, as opposed to, I have to leave my job because it's time, and people get depressed more in retirement. I want people to be really excited about it. I want them to have a great time in retirement.
Right. And to your point, I mean, I think so much time and energy is spent on achieving retirement goals financially, which is incredibly important. Obviously, that's at the core of what we do as fiduciary advisors to retirement plans, helping build a retirement program that allows employees to make good decisions for today, tomorrow, for their long-term financial goals. And it's a critical piece to being able to retire. But you're right that equally as important, and depending upon the individual or the family, it could even be more important that the behavioral, emotional, and just sort of experiential part of retirement and planning that out is critical to making sure that you're healthy, happy, and successful in retirement.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's so many elements that can flow in after you retire. There's caregiving, there's your own health, there's, whether you're going to be, people say, I want to travel. That's the first thing people say when they retire, I want
Hmm.
to travel. Well, the reality is, yes, we all want to travel, but you just can't travel 365 days a year. So what will you do the other 2, 3 weeks? After you've traveled for 2, 3, 4 weeks of the year, what else are you going to do? And so it's the rare person. I met a couple on a cruise, and they essentially sold their condo and they just cruise. That's what they do. Well, that's rare that people
Right.
people are going to cruise through retirement, jump from from one cruise ship to another. That's not everybody's lifestyle, but what will be your lifestyle? And so, just as important as the financial piece is that people are prepared for all of the elements. There's the physical element, there's mental. How will you keep yourself engaged mentally? Because every day your brain has been working every day. And now you have an opportunity to really sit in Netflix and chill and watch, binge watch whatever shows you've been dying to binge watch. But that's not going to keep your brain moving the way that you need to. And crossword puzzles and word finds are great, but most of us have been intensely involved in something. And so our
Right.
brains are requiring more. The brain is a muscle, we all know, and we all know what happens if you don't use muscles.
Well, in the book, you talk about some of these gaps that people tend to overlook when they're planning for retirement. Just to give a little tease of that, like what are some of the biggest ones that in your experience already and going out and giving workshops and meeting with individuals and writing the book, like what are the biggest gaps that you've seen that someone misses in preparing for retirement?
Yeah, so one of the big ones that I like to talk to people about is what the I stands for, which is imagine what's next. So we stop dreaming as adults. We no longer start thinking about all the things we want to do. And retirement is a great opportunity to imagine what you could do. What are all the possibilities, not just a few things that you've been thinking about while you're working. But we don't stop and think anyway, because most of the time we're on rotation. We're on that hamster wheel, moving in the direction of whatever the
Mhm.
job or the family is. And it's great to be able to sit back and just literally put down a list of all the things you could possibly do. What's on your bucket list that you've always wanted to do, but you haven't? What are some possibilities, things that you thought maybe I'll consider that? I always wanted to learn a language. Well, there's something you have time to do that. And so, one of the mistakes I think, and one of the pitfalls is kind of walking in with one idea of what you're going to do in retirement, and that's it. This is what I'm going to do. This is one idea. When the
Mhm.
world is open to you, and you can do anything. The other thing is on the social side. I think we underestimate the social impact of retirement because we
Yeah.
think we walk into retirement and all the relationships we had at work, they'll still be there. Well, the reality is they're still working and you've got a lot of free time. And so the once a month lunch becomes once a quarter and then maybe once a year, and then you kind of forget to text people and all of that happens. And so your ecosystem starts to shrink. Your social ecosystem starts to shrink. And if we're not deliberate about either creating new relationships, maintaining old relationships, we'll soon find that our world shrinks, right? So one of the statistics out of the coaching program is that our touch points are about 22 a day when we're working, and that shrinks to 11 a day when we retire. So 50%, and whatever your 50 is. So if you talk to 10 people a day when you were retiring, you're probably only talk to 5 people, and five of those
Yep.
people could be in your family.
Right.
So that's where it becomes really, really important for the network, right? So that's where the N is. It's nurture your network.
Yeah, when I read the book and was thinking about the acronym, I think that was the one that resonated with me the most. Just the way that I think about it, from my perspective, working with a lot of individuals and families who go in retirement, thinking about my own, mother and others in retirement is that nurturing your network, and cultivating, having to really like make an effort to cultivate meaningful and inspiring relationships.
Absolutely.
I
And
think
sometimes
so
it means
important.
finding the group that works for you. So, tied into that is, what are you passionate about? Because one of the ways to create that social bond with people is to find other people who are passionate about what you're passionate about. Great opportunity if you're passionate about volunteering. If you start volunteering, you'll run into other people who are passionate about volunteering. You now start to build a network of people who volunteer, who invite you to go places to volunteer and do things. If you're a traveler, join a travel group. Maybe it's a local one, maybe it's one that travels internationally because those people want to travel. And so instead of I'll just book the trip alone. Why don't you consider booking the trip with this group? And maybe you don't know anybody when you book the trip, but I guarantee you, when you leave that trip, you are going to know some people.
Yeah. So kind of a good jumping off point from there. The one area that I think it becomes really relevant and perhaps doesn't get enough attention is that for a lot of people, their career is a huge part of their identity. And when the person retires, when that identity goes away, it can be disorienting. It can be very, I think, challenging from a mental health perspective, or just, even just introspective of like, what do I do? So how did you navigate that? I know you were kind of prepared for that already, but how did you navigate that? And how do you, when you're talking and coaching others, help them to think about preparing for the transition from their, a 30 or 40-year career into retirement?
Yeah, it is a tough, and I always say to people, the higher you are in an organization, the tougher it is. So for those who are C-suite, it's even harder because you've been the chief something or other for quite
Mhm.
some time. And so, I was talking to one client, she said, I don't know how I'd answer the question, what do you do? We all know that's the second question at a networking event. What's
Yeah.
your name? What do you do? And for some people, it's not being able to say they're the SVP or the chief or whatever your role is. That becomes very, very difficult and almost a little bit scary. And so for me, because I also helped in the recruiting of my replacement, I had a little bit more time. So I did have the shocking moment of reposting my job on LinkedIn after my company had shared it, and thought to myself, I just posted my own job that I'm still in right now. That just feels a little bit disconcerting. And so I had time to process that because that's not going to be my job. The other shocker was when I actually was training her. I actually went to the last annual meeting for myself, first annual meeting for her. And it's very strange to be training the person who's in your job and realizing that that's not your job. So when people say CFO, they're not talking about you. And
Right.
so it was a slow transition for me, but I would say the thing that really helped me and the thing that I coach other people on is if you are excited about where you're going, you will not be clinging on to what you had. And so for me, it's the from what to what. Figure out what you're going to do and where you came from because becomes less exciting to you because you're really excited about where you're going. And so what I really try to do is sit down with individuals and say, well, this is your opportunity to do anything you want. What are some things that would excite you if you could do them now? And for some people, it's really hard to think about doing anything but what they've done. And I say,
Right.
ignore your prior job. You were the CEO, correct? If you could start all over again, what would you have done? And they come up with something. I'm like, okay, we're on a roll here. So how can you take that which you're excited about, which you were excited about then? How can you make that into something? Or how can you take your experience that you've had and use it to help others? So whether you're going to become a mentor or create some kind of program to help other young entrepreneurs, all of those are at your disposal. Which one of those makes you feel like you're contributing to the world? Because we all want purpose. And so
Right.
when we find our purpose, life becomes a lot more engaging and exciting when we know what our purpose is and we start working within that purpose.
Right. And one thing I tell people quite a bit is that the retirement plan, the planning process is more than just the money, the financial piece. We have a workshop that we deliver as part of our financial coaching inside of 401k plans called Life After Work,
Mm.
to try and get savers and investors and households thinking about how you're going to spend your time, how you're going to have a purpose. Um, and so, obviously there are scenarios where you meet with somebody or talk to somebody and they've already been retired for a few months or maybe a year, and they've not yet really identified that yet. But ultimately, I think what you dig into in the book is really talking through these things while somebody's getting ready for retirement or on the precipice. Maybe I thought that the book was really a great companion for an individual or partners, spouses that are like 3 years out or so to retirement, all the way to maybe just entering into retirement, to think about what are you going to do with your time? How are you going to protect your health? How are you going to stay connected in your networks or build new networks? And I know that, you really dig into those areas in the book.
Yeah, I always tell people it's not too early to start 5 to 7 years out of when you're going to retire for two reasons.
Okay.
One, because when you start thinking about retiring, that's a long plan, right? Of what am I going to do? So it also helps you, as it did when you're working with somebody like your organization, if I start thinking about it 5 to 7 years in advance and I set a target, I can then inform my advisor what my target is. So
Hmm.
we can make sure that we work on a financial basis to get me to that target. If I never have a target, and that's the problem, a lot of people don't have a target. They just kind of keep working. I'm just going to keep working, keep working.
Right.
You don't really have a target. So you're not really working to anything. You're just working. But when you tell your advisor, here's my target, they then can help you structure your portfolio in a way that helps you to reach that target. So that's really number one for me, is to make sure that people are working with somebody that helps them to structure in that way. And then the second thing is, when you start planning enough in advance, let's just say you thought you wanted to start your own company. Why not start it while you're still working full time? Make it a side hustle. And then after you retire, it kind of becomes a part time main hustle, right? So if you start in enough time in advance, you get to use that time to plan. If you say, I really always wanted to open my own Etsy shop and this is what I want to create. Now you have time in while you're still collecting a paycheck, to do some of the things, to set up some of the costs associated with your new business, get that all set up so that when you retire, you're then not scrambling to do some of that other stuff. So I say, it's not too early to start,
Yeah.
5 to 7 years in advance.
And maybe that's the answer to this question, but I wanted to kind of have a big sort of takeaway. And so for the audience here, and that's, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody who's in this, you know, period of life, maybe a few years from retirement, maybe 5 to 7 years, or maybe they just retired. There's sort of the first action step, the first takeaway moment, that they should have from listening to this. What would that be?
Don't retire without a plan. That's my advice. I think that we underestimate the impact of retirement emotionally, psychologically, physically, all socially, all of those things. We underestimate that impact. We don't realize that having worked for 30 years, 40 years in a career, this is a huge shift. What's interesting to me, Alex, is we make plans if we're going to buy a house, we make plans when we're going to have a child, we make plans for every major event in our life, but we don't make a plan other than financial for retire. We only actually
Mhm.
do one piece of that, the financial side. And so this is a big event in our life that actually is going to span a very long time if we're lucky. And so it's something that needs a plan. And so I'd say to people, think when you start thinking about retirement, the first thing you ought to think to yourself is, I need to start working on my retirement plan. So when I retire, I have really some idea of what I'm going to do for the next 20 to 30 years of my life. Because the reality is, and I say this in the book, Monday through Friday, you worked all week. Saturday was your catch up, your kind of get my errands done. And then Sunday is either church day, family day, whatever that day is for you, football, relaxation. When you retire, you have 6 Saturdays and a Sunday. Every day is Saturday, except Sunday still keeps its routine. You need to start thinking about, what am I going to do for 6 Saturdays?
Uh-huh. Um, and then the last question for you, just looking back through this process that you've been through over the last now year or so plus, um, what has surprised you? What have you learned most about maybe yourself or, the entire process in retirement, especially in just the work you've done and writing the book and going out and speaking, delivering workshops, speaking at conferences and conventions. What was the one thing that surprised you the most, maybe about yourself or about the experience?
I think what surprised me most, Alex, was like I had trouble keeping still. That I already knew that I always had to have things to do. But when I first retired, I couldn't believe how many things I was doing in like the first, like, who writes a book in their first year of retirement? Like, that's not resting. And it's funny because I'd retired in September of 2024, and by maybe January of 2025, I'd had a meeting with my executive coach who had been coaching me all while I was at the MBA, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I kind of listened to some things. She said, "Why are you doing all that? I thought we agreed that you would take 6 months off." The problem was I didn't give myself permission to take 6 months off, so I jumped right in and I started doing things. The one thing I found is, as I've talked to people who've come out of executive roles, they did the exact same thing. They almost felt like they had to jump into the next thing as opposed to giving themselves a rest and say, what are the things I want to do? what's next for me and what are the things that are really important versus just accepting everything for myself. Except, I mean, people would call, can I, do you have time to have a meeting? And 8:30 was the time they picked. And I had to start going, I'm like rolling out of bed at 8:30. Okay. So 8:30 is not going to work. I can do 9:30 maybe, but 10 o'clock is a sweet spot, right? So just realizing that you no longer have to get up and take a meeting at any time. That's a surprise. That was hard. That was a surprise. And it's surprised me that I wasn't the only one. I thought, well, I'm kind of a type A personality. Of course, that's going to be mine. But I talked to people with all kinds of personalities and like, nope, I finished working and I kept thinking I was supposed to be doing something. So I did something. That was a surprise that people having trouble just stepping back, saying, applause to the career I just finished. Let me pause before I jump into this new thing.
Mhm. Well, it's certainly an incredible sort of segue into why this book's so important is that there are so many people that go through a similar experience. And it's a great read. I enjoyed when you first launched it, getting the chance to go and read the book. And I think it's not just a book, but really a guide to thinking about your life post career where you want to have purpose, you want to enjoy and have the health, the wealth, the finances to enjoy your life after working a long career. Lisa, where can people get a copy of Retired and Killing It?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon, of course. If they want a signed copy, they can go to my website, which is retiredandkillingit.com. I sign them and ship them myself. And if you want to use the code that Alex and team are going to provide, that will be a signed copy, which I'll ship myself, so you can get it through there. There's also a companion digital workbook for those people who like to write and need to
That's
work
right.
out.
That's awesome. Yep.
So there's a digital workbook for that accompanies it. But yes, Amazon or directly on my website, you can find me on all things Retired and Killing It, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
Yeah, and that's right. And so we'll post a discount code. It's Hub 15 is the discount code, but we'll post that in the LinkedIn live comments. If you use that on the Retired and Killing It website, you can get a discount on the book purchase, and Lisa will sign it. And I'm super excited because you're actually going to be presenting at an upcoming workshop for us, for our clients, our retirement plan clients. You're delivering the workshop version of this out to our clients, employees, investors, and savers of all ages, but especially those who are nearing retirement. And I'm thrilled that you're doing that alongside us and for us. We're also going to be giving away some free copies of the book to our live viewers and anybody who views the recorded version of this workshop over the course of the next week. Check it out. It's a super, super relevant and important topic that we spend so much time on. And it's really, again, it's exciting, Lisa, that you're living this and delivering such a great resource to people and families who are trying to figure out what they're going to do and how they're going to continue to enjoy their life and kill it in retirement. So, thanks again for joining. I really appreciate, Lisa, that, you taking the time to share your story and insights for our audience. This has been a great conversation. For everyone watching, thanks for spending a little bit part of your day with us. If you found this helpful, feel free to share the replay of this with somebody who's getting closer to retirement or thinking about what's next. If you have questions about your own retirement plan, financial wellness, or anything else we talked about today, feel free to reach out to our team or to Lisa. You can find her again at All Things Retired and Killing It, the website, Instagram, social media. Lisa, any final comments from your side?
No, Alice, it's been great to be here. I so look forward to the workshop. I love delivering the workshop because I love to be able to interact with people and get their questions and just get their feedback. So I'm really looking forward to that next month.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.